What do I do with this? Okay. Okay, let me just see. Like,
Jaime, can you say your last name? So
Castrellon.
Castrellon.
Perfect. You got it. You even rolled the R.
Well, are we ready? Let's do.
I mean, we could wait a minute if you want, but I mean, because I think everything else was kind of pushed off. So it's 2:05, 4:04.
I think if you're ready.
I'm ready if you're ready.
All right, everyone. Well, we'll bring us back to presentation mode. I hope that was really fun for all of you. I love this part of the weekend. Like meeting with my mentee is great. The lunch is great, especially after everyone has met with their mentors, has like a renewed sense of questions to ask and different enthusiasm for thinking about their pathway. So I hope everyone had a great experience with that. And now we have a couple things for the rest of the day. We have Dr. Jaime Castrellon. Did I say it right again? Okay, who is joining us. He's a new postdoc here at Penn in one of my labs. So I'm very glad he's here. And he's going to be talking about strategizing recommendation letters, which I'm sure he will tell you is an important part of your application. And I'll let him tell you all the other things you need to know about it. So join me in welcoming him.
Thanks. It's very exciting and fun to be here and share some of this knowledge that we've kind of acquired over all of these years. So I want you to feel welcome to ask questions along the way. I'll definitely have a place to ask questions if you have questions to save them at the end, but we want this to feel very comfortable and casual. So feel free to just jump in and raise your hand as we go along. So, I know that thinking about like recommendation letters can feel scary and intimidating, thinking about reaching out to folks about, who can speak to my abilities and, affect my chances in grad school. But let's see if we can break this down and kind of release any of those potential fears. The important part is that, these applications for PhD programs and fellowships, typically they're going to ask for 2 to 3 recommendation letters, sometimes more for fellowships. So if you're thinking about applying for things like additional funding, for example, they might want more references. The best case scenario is that you have some, letters from these awesome all-star professors, and then maybe the worst case is that you've got some people who don't really like you. Let's try to go somewhere between those, and I think that you'll be all right. So important to remember that this is just one part of your application, and you can talk to your mentors a little bit more about this, but you'll find that when your application is being reviewed, this isn't the only thing that they're considering. They're balancing this with potentially test scores, potentially experiences that you've had. Maybe you've written some work, your research interests themselves. So don't feel that, for example, if you don't have research experience in a laboratory for somebody to speak to you about, that doesn't make you a good candidate. There's lots of experiences that you've had that somebody can speak to, and you can show that evidence, not just in your letters, but in the other things in your application as well. Yeah.
And you might get to this later in the presentation, but I was really intrigued by what you said about the letters from people who secretly think. How do you kind of, do you have like a vetting process for that?
We will get to that. So I'm going to save it, but there's specific language that you can use in your request that faculty know, and it's a kind of a signal for them to either enthusiastically say yes or to kindly say no.
Okay.
Yeah. So we'll get to that in a moment. So the 3 important parts of this process is to make sure that you're asking well in advance. You don't want to leave them with very little time to write your letter, because obviously if you don't give them much time, your letter may not be of really high quality. At a minimum, you want to give them a month potentially. You should be thinking about this though a little bit earlier than that though. So if this is somebody who maybe you work with them, it's good to start letting them, like, thinking maybe in the summer or in August, September, letting them know that I'm going to be applying to graduate school in the future. I might reach out to you about a letter. So you can start kind of teasing that ahead of time informally, but you shouldn't wait too long to reach out to them, because these are people who will probably be writing letters for not just you, but maybe 3, 4 other, 5 other students. And they're going to be writing maybe 6, 7 reference letters for you, plus 7 or more letters for all of those other applicants too. So just remember that giving them as much time as possible is going to be helpful. The second part is reminding them. This is a part where if you're thinking about faculty members, you have to manage upward, because deadline management is really difficult. I've learned for a lot of faculty members, and you may have to send them periodic reminders. So what I've done in the past for myself is leave calendar reminders of when I need to remind people to submit their letters. It's happened every time I've either applied for an award or for grad school that I've had to remind the faculty members the day before it was due. And it may come down to that time point. So just don't be afraid to nudge them a little bit, because they may need it. And it's nothing, don't take it as antagonistic. Oftentimes people just forget, and it's nothing personal. Again, they may be writing letters for many people, and so juggling your letter is just one extra thing that they need a reminder for. You can really help your letter writers prepare by assembling kind of like a little package. So maybe a paragraph that says exactly what are the programs they're interested in. These are the deadlines. What information do you want them to highlight specifically? Do you want to provide them with like your CV or resume? As much information you can provide them in like a really digestible format is going to benefit your letter writers the most. So you really want to make it easy for them, because the easier it is for them to write it, they don't have to worry about reaching out back to you and saying like, well, okay, you tell me more about this program, especially if you're applying to different kinds of programs. Maybe you're applying to a rotational neuroscience program, and you're applying to a program where you're reaching out directly to a faculty member. Your letter writer might want to tailor these letters. So this is going to depend on your letter writer. Some letter writers will write something more general, and so maybe that's less important. What I've done in the past is make sure that I've contacted them and provided them with my CV, personal statements or writing statements, so they know what my interests are. They can mention that in the letter. I've also told them, exactly what I want them to emphasize in my letter. So I've said something like, I would really appreciate it if you could talk about my technical skills, or when I learned this software and use that, to help the group achieve some goal. So trying to pinpoint exactly what you want is really important. And I think that's particularly important when you are thinking about multiple letter writers from the same organization, the same lab, the same group, because you don't want people to just say the exact same thing about you. You want these letters to all complement each other. So if you can get your letter writers to speak to different aspects about you, that can help these committees see all the dimensions about yourself. So in my case, for example, when I was applying to graduate school, I had a letter from a postdoc in the lab who I worked on with one project. And then I had a letter from the PI of the lab, the professor, with whom I worked on a completely different project. And I asked them to make sure that what they spoke to were about these different projects. So even though it was all the same lab and I was seeing them both, every time I went in there, it looked like these were completely different experiences. And so that way they could really just show different information that complements itself. If you have questions, again, feel free to jump in. I don't want you to feel afraid to ask for multiple letters. So many of you are going to be thinking about applying to more than one program. These faculty members, if it's them or supervisors, they're typically used to submitting more than one letter. And so you can email them and ask them if they feel comfortable with that. They'll know what they can handle or they can't handle. And again, that's going to come back down to managing upward and making sure that that they know about these deadlines. That's going to be most important. So we're going to get a little bit interactive here, and we want to see if we can kind of figure out our strategy to figure out who our letter writers are. Okay. So if you want to bring out your computers, we're going to take down some notes. The first thing I want you all to do is to list everyone you've ever worked with. It does not have to be somebody with whom you did research with. It could be somebody who was just your boss, a supervisor. It can actually even be somebody who knows you in a more lateral position, you know. So just think about all of the different people who you've ever worked with. So I'll give you a couple minutes to just write that down. There's just some examples there, you know, they can also be club advisors. Don't worry about like what specifically they might be able to say about you. Just think about who you work with.
By the way, I'm opening the cakes. Anyone want cake?
No, this is a perfect time right now. Yeah. Even if it had nothing to do with research, you know, anybody who you've worked with. I know I've said like, you know, anybody you've worked with, but I've also listed professors there because the context of just being a student is sufficient too. So if there are professors, you know, who you particularly liked, that's somebody else who can provide a reference. Okay, so hopefully you all have like a list of some folks who you can think of. We're now going to make a second list. So this is going to be a separate list. This time, I want you to think more deeply about the different qualities that you want to have emphasized in your letter. These are just some examples. It could be your technical experience, your dedication, your motivation, past works that you've done, something that you've demonstrated in your job. These might also be qualities about yourself that you highlight in your personal statement. So what are all the things that you think are important to share? Okay, so now before we go on to this third part, I want you to just like partner up with the person who's closest to you. And I want you to just share with each other the qualities that you listed here with each other, because there might be something that you didn't think about yet that your partner might have listed. So I want you to just take a couple minutes to share with each other what are the qualities that you listed. So that way we make sure that we've thought about everything about ourselves, because it's often really hard to, list those positive qualities that we want to emphasize. So take a minute to work, just chat with the people in your table and just share with each other what are the qualities. Yeah. And I'll come around and like answer some questions too. Yeah, see, that's why you got to share. We might not catch on.
Okay, some people are self-actualized here.
It shouldn't be too difficult, but at the same time, so I selected some of my past different professors and current ones that I'm working with right now on research. One of them I included was my graduate advisor program, in which I did my master's thesis on. So that was something that I included in my second list of qualities that I wanted to emphasize, is specifically that master's thesis research, because I wanted to run it. And then it took a lot of dedication to complete that during the COVID pandemic. So I wanted to run my me not only completing a project during COVID, but also graduating at the same time. Other people I included were from nonprofit organizations that I'm currently working for. So with those, the emphasis of qualities I wanted to showcase for those individuals were publication experience, because I'm co-writing a book right now for that. Community outside civic work, leadership skills, dedication, and things like that, because especially, I guess with this nonprofit organization, we're doing a lot of different types of tasks, and including submitting grants to the Department of Education. So I want my letter of recommendation to talk about how we were in the process of working on that together, but we're doing a book on early childhood education. So there's, it's still going on right now as I speak. But we submitted it to publishers last month, and they liked it, but they still have revisions for us, and we still got to work on it. Other than that, I think if there's something I wanted them to highlight was the dedication to start a project and continue to finish it. I guess that was something I wanted to focus on. So I just put, I have technical skills here, but I also made sure to include like personalities that just by conflicts, I was able to resolve. So that was kind of, or listed. I think so, but I don't know. I just listed it, and I'm telling you guys more. So that's kind of interesting. So I wonder if having like a meeting with my letter recommended be able to explain instead of telling them, oh, can you just explain A, B, and C? Why don't I just like, oh, if you have the time, we can set up like a meeting perhaps to, because the way I'm explaining it to you is like, it gives more context and more what I kind of want them to emphasize rather than like a list. Like, can you just talk about this one project and that's it? So you should see my list. It's just kind of plain and boring. Like, the way I explained it to you is like more detailed. But that's something I love.
Write all this out. Like meeting with them is good too, but if you want to like write out the skills, I think that's probably honestly a lot of professors are so busy that they'll like have you what you go to them and just like use that as the base for what they're writing. So you can probably like write those skills out, like
and it helps because I used to be in a scholarship committee, so I used to judge recipients you know, the grades, especially the letters of recommendation, you can tell which ones are so passionate about the student and which ones completely do not understand at all. And being part of a scholarship committee helped me a lot. You can see the passion. Oh, but anyone else? Or we run out of time. What did you guys?
I'll give you all like 30 more seconds to wrap this up, and then we're going to share.
Obviously, I also work.
All right, let's see if we can bring everyone back here. So I hope that this was a little bit helpful. You learned something new about yourself or something you already knew and you didn't think about earlier when you were listening to these things out. And so now just so we can make sure that everybody's thought about all of these possible qualities, I'm just gonna go down each of the tables. If you don't mind sharing some of the qualities that aren't listed there that you or folks in your group thought of. So we'll just start here. Is there anything that wasn't on this list that you thought of? They don't have to be just one word things. They can be, so something much longer. Any other quality? Resilience. Yeah, being able to successfully overcome different obstacles. That's really important. Yeah.
I guess being a team player and supporting undergrads or graduate students in a research lab is incredibly important.
Yeah, everything we do is team-based. We're working with groups. So that's definitely something that you want to have your letter writers be able to emphasize about you. You don't all have to say anything you don't want to, but so do you want to share anything?
Maybe like having a general curiosity towards
Yes.
like
Yes.
what we do, like not just inside the lab, but like what is happening outside the lab.
Yeah, no, definitely. When I've written letters for students, that's something I have emphasized. You know, their intellectual curiosity is really important, particularly if graduate school departments are thinking about someone's ability to think like a scientist, and are they going to be able to, you know, think of new ideas and you know, really grow. So that's really great examples. In this center table here, what were some of the qualities that you thought of that weren't already provided? Okay. Oh, like, can you say a little bit more about that? Like, yeah, that's going to be really important for your letter writers to say, how do they know you? How long have they known you? What was the nature of the relationship? Like, how often did you meet? You know, those little things can add more context of like how much the committees will trust what this person is saying about you. Is there anything else in the table here? Yeah. Yeah, so being able to you know, implement some tool or some software in different contexts, or different environments, or different situations, that like flexibility and creativity is really important to be able to emphasize. Y'all over here on the right, or something.
You talked about ownership, like being able to conduct your own research. I still wanted to provide.
That's really important. That's a really great one. Other ways to think about that is independence. So independence is an important part of grad school. A lot of times you're not always going to be working with everyone. Your dissertation is basically your own project. So that's a great point. Is there anything else over here y'all want to share? Yeah.
Just like if there's
Yeah. That's important. It does tell these things how much you really care about it. So these personal connections that you have with your research. That's something that your reference writers can speak to if those personal connections are something that you feel comfortable talking about. Let's move to the back. Is there anything over here that y'all talked about? Yeah, so like this also reminds me, there's this other part of the reference writing process that people don't often talk about, that your reference writers will encounter, in that when they're submitting a reference letter, they're often asked to make these ratings, these judgments about you along with these really arbitrary traits sometimes. So you just want to keep in mind whether or not you feel comfortable with this reference writer making those judgments about you. There's like a lot of controversy about that component of the submission process for these letters. Endurance is really important because grad school in 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, something like that. And that's a really important quality. Is there any other qualities or traits that you all come up with? Yeah. The adaptability is really important, especially if you're thinking about a rotational program. Being able to flexibly switch between, you know, doing mice surgeries and then perhaps doing some kind of mapping of cognitive function. All right, and then to the back finally.
We've had some bumps involved with this.
No, that's really important because you're gonna have, inevitably we'll all have bumps along the road within grad school. So having somebody able to speak to your ability to overcome those situations or how you handle the situation can definitely help. Was there anything else y'all wanted to add back there? Yeah, project management is very important because that's what you'll be doing as a grad student. Not just managing projects, but also managing people. That goes a little bit to that leadership. So these are all really great suggestions. I hope you heard the suggestions from other tables and from other people in your group. Because now what I want you to do is, if you write it down, you can circle, but otherwise highlight the people who were in list 1 who can talk about all of those traits that you just listed out. So right now, take a minute to think about all those people from that first list who can speak to those things you've listed about yourself in list 2. You want to have at least 3, but potentially you can have more than that, of course. You've listed out more people. And it's great if these people can speak to more than one of those qualities about you, which is hopefully the case, that they're not just speaking of, they can't just speak about your leadership, but also your determination, your project management skills, things like that.
Actually, I have a question.
Yeah.
About people who- So I've got like old school people when I said I was going back to school. I'll write your recommendation. So I'm wondering, like, some of these people are like close to me. Some people, like, I did actually work with my husband. Could you write me one, or would they say that's my husband? He's the same. Or he'll be sitting on the couch.
Yeah. So, no, this is a really great question. So I think that it's going to depend on the committee. There will definitely be faculty member who will say that, who may not put a lot of weight in that kind of letter. But what's more important is what he's saying about you. Not just like, oh, she's great, you should, accept her. But are there the specific skills that you talk about that are going to serve you as a graduate student? Do you
Did he
think?
say he's my husband?
No, I would say
No.
they're the husband. Yeah, we're the friends. Yeah. Yeah, I would say unless it was, yes, and if you did have the right recommendation.
But we
That's the, so is it that you can only choose one of them? So do you already have like a third one? I think if the if the person who has a prestigious name can really speak to your like research interests in some way, that can help. Some committees are going to look at that name and they'll put a lot of weight in that. Unfortunately, I would say it'd be great if you can have both letters, because you do want someone who can actually speak to what you've done if they've known you for a longer time. Like that's a more meaningful letter. But some individual faculty members might be swayed more by a name. So that's not really like something that you can just assume that any school will care more about one than the other. Yes, people can write joint letters.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I've had many faculty members write me joint letters. I recently had faculty members here write me joint letters. They both sign it. They describe that they are both my supervisors. So that is something that can work. Oftenly, if there's things that you've worked with them or that they can speak to independent, that you've done independently, or the if there are different non-overlapping things that they can talk about, that's probably better, but a joint letter is fine. But just note that that's still considered to be like one letter. It's not that they would interpret this to be two letters.
What about peers? Do you give recommendation letters to peers? Like, and then when I say peers, like a lab person that you work with in a lab,
I've seen that.
or maybe people we've met here.
I don't know. So it's going to matter on what they can talk about. So I don't think that people here that you met today will be able to talk about.
Well, I mean, like if you continue to stay in contact with them.
It probably still wouldn't be sufficient to say that they can speak to your potential as a grad student. So, but peers, just in general, like if you're working in a lab, maybe like a lab manager or something like that, that's fine.
Because like I'm working with grad student on a project now. She's a third year doctoral student. Would she be?
Definitely, yes. That's a great kind of person to have.
So, as a grad student, I co-wrote letters with guys. So not everyone does it the same way. It's something sort of asked about, but as a third year grad student, I certainly not had a name that I would recognize, but I did know the students really well. So I would write the letter and then the guy would sort of tweaks, and that's sort of the best of both.
Yeah,
worlds.
I've definitely done that too, and co-wrote, or like the student had come to me, and then I suggested having the PI's name, but I wrote the letter.
Okay.
They had both for me. Did you have a question of this too, or there was an answer? Great. Bye.
Still write the good letter, but not as strong.
That's a tricky question. I don't know. So personally, I would probably go with the one who can speak more about my research in another field. How different is this other field? Because your research skills are going to be pretty similar across different fields. You know, you're still going to be doing data analysis. You're going to be writing papers. You're going to be supervising people. So it's what you did in that research position or that relevance. That's what's more important.
You can also submit a fourth letter, secret fourth letter recommendations. Feel like you have 4 people who would together provide like a really good picture. And that would I choose for my third letter writer? Like often programs will be spaced.
It will just say like optional for, yeah. Sometimes fit, I think too. So. Okay, so hopefully you have your list. So now for each of these people, I want you to, think about how you met, what did you work on together from those people that you've now circled, okay? For example, make notes about like, when did you know them? Did I take a class with them in spring 2018? Or did I do an internship in that company like in summer 2019? So keep those notes together because these are going to be important to cue these reference writers when you email them. They may not remember you right off the bat, and having that information is going to be critical. Okay, so I hope you've got like a little bit of information there that you can hold on, because this is information that we'll be able to put into our initial emails. So the point came up earlier about like, how do you make sure you get that reference writer to write that good letter and not that letter you don't want. So the key word is to ask for a strong recommendation letter. It's very important to use that phrasing. Asking for a strong reference letter or a strong recommendation letter is something that your reference writers will see and understand as you're specifically looking for something that's glowing. You want them to say the best that they can about you. If they cannot write you a strong reference letter, they should not be writing you a letter. What questions do you have about that? Because I know that, that makes you like think about who you want to request a letter from.
Do you recommend asking for the catch-up first and then in person asking for the letter, or saying, I would like to do a catch-up to talk about a letter and some other memorandums.
Yeah. So what I would do is, I have an example in a moment, but I would email them, let them know that you're applying to graduate school, and that you'd like to know whether or not they can provide you with a strong reference letter, and that you would like to meet, if possible, if they can, or if they want to chat about it. You can meet over the phone or over Zoom or in person, whatever they're most comfortable with. But that's something I would bring up when you're first asking for the reference letter. So just to go to that point, you don't need to send them your CV and your writing samples and your request all in the same email. First of all, they may not be able to write you your letter, so that may not be necessary. But overwhelming your writers with too much information in one email is just not a good strategy. You want to keep that first email really brief, short, just asking them, I'm applying to grad school, can you write me a letter? So like, here's an example, dear so-and-so, I'm reaching out because I'm planning to apply to PhD programs in, psychology or linguistics. And I would like to know if you could write a strong reference letter supporting my applications. Let them know how many applications you're applying to, so that lets them anticipate how much work and time that they'll have to set aside for this and whether or not they can do that. And if they are able to provide this reference, you can send them any details in a follow-up email that would go after that. So that might be somebody, for example, who already knows that you might be applying to grad school, someone who you mentioned it to before. Maybe you're working in a lab where it's a lot easier to just kind of build that connection. But maybe it's somebody who you haven't talked to in a while. Like, let's say you're talking to a course professor or a teaching assistant. So this is where those cues about when you worked with them or knew them is really important, because you're going to want to tell them like, oh, I was a student in this course and I took it in this semester of this year. And then mentioning something to help them remember you, like, okay, well, I was on this group project, or I really liked this about the course, and that really inspired me to want to go into graduate school. Helping that just filler, that connection is just going to make this less awkward for them and for you. You want to make sure that they remember you, that they know that you're interested in this in research, and that you are applying to grad school. And again, the same thing, you want to remind them of what you're applying to, how many programs that you're going to be applying to, how many letters really that they're going to be needing to submit, and seeing if you want to set aside some time to chat. Okay, so this is all that I have formally as those examples. But if anybody has questions that was not answered before, we can now talk more freely, and anything that's come up or that we haven't talked about yet, I'm happy to answer some questions. Yeah. We can do that. Yeah. I want to also like mention like one thing that you might encounter, which is something that so many of us have occasionally seen. You might reach out to somebody about writing you a letter, and they might ask you to write the letter. So there will be some faculty members who do that. That's not uncommon, and there may not be much of a way around it. In that case, there are different things you could do. One thing that I've done in the past is I've kind of provided them with a template that just has like the bullet points of what I want them to emphasize, what's important, and then they can turn those into sentences. The more complicated situation is when they are just expecting you to write the whole thing, and then they will attach their name to it. So this does happen, and if you don't want them to write your letter, then you move on. But otherwise, if this is the person who is really speaking to what you've done, then fill it out. Yeah.
Speaking to that, there was one time that they used to do that for an application, but because it's really easy to tell the difference between you talking about yourself and it just using a reference letter that somebody else had written. We can just use a lot.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I've done that too, is to see if you are in that kind of situation, see if you can get examples from other supervisors if they're happy to share letters that others have written for them. Sometimes they can just anonymize it and take out names, but having that language that they use is helpful. So again, that just makes it look more like the professor wrote it. Go ahead. Yeah.
So the way that I'm thinking about the hierarchy of my letters correct would be like I try and get as many professors as possible, especially and then other people in the class. And then beneath that, like maybe they can research some program who come up with on different things and the research that I'm working on, but have the time to actually fund it.
That is a good way to think about it. What I would wonder is like, so those other people in the lab, is that the same lab as those professors?
So there would be like two different professors.
Yeah.
And there would be people from
So what I would wonder is whether or not this might be a situation where having those other members and that professor writing the letter together might be helpful, because if those other people in the lab can speak more to what you done day to day, since they're probably your closer supervisor, that would be really helpful. Or finding a way to coordinate in a group email, like, you know, lab manager can say all these things about me, and can you work with them to incorporate these aspects into your letter? That's something that I would try to strategize, because if you just only get the letter from your professor, they may not be reaching out to other folks in the lab who can speak more to what you've done specifically. So they might be speaking very generally, and that may not be as strong of a letter. Yeah.
One thing is if you're working on a new project with the PI, like what's a way to potentially share updated information after the deadline? Like, for example, can the PI say, we started this project and I'm excited and open to sharing your project updates?
Yeah, so that's going to be something that they would want to put in their letter. It's going to be up to like these committees or professors who are evaluating it, whether they want to follow up. But having a letter writer who just makes it very clear that they're open to following up is helpful. You know, that shows that they really that does show that they really care about your future, that they see that there's really a lot of potential there. And if there are additional updates, that they can provide that. That's something that I would do. Yeah.
I have not specifically worked in the lab, but he was impressed with my background outside of school, and so he wanted me to start doing the lab meetings. So my RA just attending the lab meetings. Do you think that is a person that the right recommendation?
I do, depending on what you've done in that lab meeting. So if this person can talk about like your like how much you've engaged with the literature, are you asking questions that are generating new ideas? there's ways that that person can still add something that's new and important for grad school.
And I'll start, actually attending that, Friday, the Friday coming up. Do you think that's enough time to get?
Yeah, so it may not be, it's not, I don't think it's necessarily a problem for them to add. Well, okay. There's two things here. One is that that may not be enough time for them to write you a strong letter. That's one. That you may need more time for them to feel comfortable speaking to your involvement. And they may write it, but it may not be strong.
So you think it's a better idea?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so you were in two groups. So you could have those as two separate letters though, because you can have one letter that's signed by like the faculty member that research the professor, and then one that's just by this PhD student if they're saying different things. Oh, then yeah, they'll have to be very clear about like how they know you. I think that as long as they make that clear, but it's again, it's just because it's going to be considered as one letter. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's our time. So, there are other questions.
Questions, otherwise we'll take a couple minutes before we transition to the right.